So you talked a bit about, or I shouldn't say a bit, you in your book about censorship of sexuality on some
Mm.
of these or not programs, but apps and websites, and that was it was something I haven't heard discussed much outside of the hashtag free the nipple thing that happened like 5 years ago or whatever. But I haven't really thought about it too much since. Why were you so impassioned by this particular topic and you know what do you suggest for how some of these tech companies can respond?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so I've always been really interested in kind of free body culture, high corporate culture in Germany, and as well as parts of where I grew up in the U.S. And so the idea that the human body is something inherently sexual has always really bothered me. And so when the Free the Nipple campaign came about, which was almost a decade ago now, maybe 8 years
Oh
ago,
wow. Yeah.
I was like 2014, I think. I was really happy to see that people were taking on this notion. And it was only a couple years after that that I started hearing from and listening to sex workers who, or people who are even sex work adjacent. So this is a spectrum between things that are not legal in the U.S., but also things that are completely legal and not even really sex work, such as pole dancing. Those folks are constantly being silenced by these platforms and not just having that content taken down. So it's not always just explicit content being removed. Sometimes they're losing their entire accounts. Sometimes they're even losing their PayPal or other payment accounts because of the work that they do. So I spoke with somebody in the book who wasn't even able to pay for groceries because that person was posting videos related to sex work on Instagram. So these companies seem to be talking to each other. We don't necessarily have that evidence, but nevertheless, that's really where my interest comes from. Is that for me, it's particularly when it's legal, but even when it's not, it's a profession. And we wouldn't be okay with censoring a florist. Why are we okay with censoring somebody who chooses to sell sex? And I think it's just really troubling. And so that's why I documented that. I actually dedicated two chapters to it. One is about more about sex. The other one's more about the human body. But I think that they go hand in hand. And it just goes to show, how I think the U.S. is really out of step with a lot of other countries on this matter.
Well, we are puritanical, but there also, I mean, what's your reaction to the rise of something like OnlyFans? I know it's a little cloistered on the internet, but maybe that's some sort of progress in that way. I hesitate to even say that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think that it's troubling in a society when that's people's only option, and so I think we should say that outright, that people should have options for employment and options for, making money. But there are people who choose that profession, and I think that's absolutely fine. I also think OnlyFans is a really interesting case because I think it was last summer. Time is a confusing entity these days, but last summer, OnlyFans tried to shut down sex work on its platform, or shut down at least certain types of explicit things like porn. And they got so much backlash, and it was really interesting to see. They actually, they dialed it back. They changed their minds. And we've seen other interesting things like I think it was the museums in Vienna choosing to put their artwork on OnlyFans, just to protest against the fact that some of their nude art gets censored on Facebook. So I think it is progress in some ways, at least within the society in which we live.
Yeah, but at the same time, there could be ways for there to be homes for for nudity on just standard social media platforms where you could control or turn things off. Say, if you have a 10-year-old, I think that's fine to say, okay, turn off the nudity thing on Instagram. That was, I think, something that you suggested as well. But the retaliatory part of it, if you break terms of service, we're going to shut down your PayPal account. I
Mhm.
know that you can't prove that coordination, but that does seem to be a troubling kind of indicator because these social media companies are so massive and they are the gateway to financial security for so many people, and there's just no recourse, and terms of service is acting as law in that way.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. I'd say, on the one hand, oh, you said something, and I know I'm missing it. So I'll start with this, and then maybe I'll find my way back to it. Yeah, so I'm talking with somebody now who is based in Europe and who's done porn basically, and pretty popular stuff. And that person has been kicked off of Instagram, even though they were not posting sexual content because of their job, we presume. They've also lost access to other platforms. And again, this is in a country, they live in a country where their work is perfectly legal. And I find that really troubling. I think the other thing here is that these platforms could, that's what it was. These platforms could make adjustments to the way in which they filter content. So we know that they use facial recognition to detect certain, or sorry, not just facial recognition, image recognition to detect certain things. So they're able to detect, say, violent content, first-person shooter videos, breasts, whatever it is. So why not use that? Why not put that tool in the hands of users and have users be able to filter out really whatever they want, whether it's nudity. You can say, I don't want me or my children to see nudity, and that's fine. That's a person's decision to make. But why do we have to ban it for everyone based on the needs or demands of the lowest common denominator? And I don't know who that is, frankly. Over the years, I've surmised that it's that it's the United States and puritanical culture, that it's the demands of Saudi Arabia. But ultimately, I kind of think that it's Mark Zuckerberg. I think that these decisions are being made by people in a company who impose their values on the rest of us, their Silicon values, so to speak.
Yeah, wonderful
Sorry.
plug there. Yeah, no, it was perfect. I mean, I actually, now you remind me that I did want to talk about Zuck, right?
Mm.
Like, are we all just living in his sexual frustrations from when he was 20 years old, and now it's just that's what's created society?
I mean, he did start Facebook as kind of a hot or not style platform, which to me is something that an incel would do. Now, he's obviously not one. He's married. His wife seems lovely. But I do feel like he has imposed a certain young man's ideal on this, and that he really hasn't, grown out of it. This, despite the fact that he's a married man with children. Again, it may not just be him. There are other people within the company who may also be imposing their values on us. But what I do know is that they're not listening to their users, who by and large seem to oppose this, or at least would rather have some sort of filter that lets them make the decisions. They're not listening to the European governments, which have put pressure on them to, at the the bare minimum, allow these things in Europe, where breasts are simply not seen as the sexual objects that they are in the United States. And yeah, so I think that I think you might be onto something here.
Yeah. So it also, I feel like, that it's difficult to get into his mind, but to bring it back to where we started as we wrap up here, like, if the if Silicon Valley's conception of freedom was libertarian and principled in that way, which libertarianism is a fantasy, so it's kind of hard to be principled in that way. It's like saying I'm a principled Harry Potter fan. But like, I mean, they putting the more power in the hands of users to determine what content that they access is should be within the ideal, but really it's just authoritarian. They want control over these things, and that's why even in the midst of these immense pressure on Facebook, with these congressional hearings about, right-wing influence, where Zuckerberg had to come in front of Congress, they were so steadfast in resisting that because it's about control. I mean, it is capitalism, and they're not any different in terms of their motivations.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely about control. I think that in the US at least, although I'm not going to, I'm not going to give a big pass to all other countries, but I think particularly in the US, both parties do seem to be about controlling and shaping society in their own image. And that's what really concerns me here, is that, the companies are doing the exact same thing. This is absolutely Zuckerberg's image, Twitter's, maybe Jack Dorsey or whoever, I don't know. There's so many people who founded that company, but it's their image. And those are different images, but they're nevertheless not it's not putting power in the hands of users. And so I would love to see these companies change, but I would also love to see new ideas for platforms, radical ideas for platforms come about that, that are platforms that are controlled more by us. And it's hard sometimes to see what that looks like, but thankfully there are lots of really cool people who are working on that.